Nicolesh Day, CoinDesk. SBF claims FTX had around $60 billion in collateral in spring of 2022 before a credit squeeze, market sell-off, and run on the bank reduced it to $9 billion and led to bankruptcy. Related Berber Gin, Wall Street Journal sources, Sequoia apologized to its fund investors for the $150 million lost on its FTX bet and details plans to improve its due diligence process on new investments. Also related, Ken Sweet, Associated Press. In a bankruptcy hearing, FTX lawyers say a substantial amount of assets have been stolen from accounts. Client names and addresses will be redacted for now. I suppose it's good that we have more than one saga in the news at this point. This was quickly becoming sort of the Elon show, and I'll admit that's in part because I find Twitter to be one of the more important going concerns, more important than FTX. That said, FTX, we don't know exactly, but it's clear lost a significant amount of real money that belonged to millions of people. And the bankruptcy hearing will slowly reveal how that happened, why it happened, and the sort of precise, and if not precise, sufficiently so, scope of exactly how much money was lost. And that is, to me, the only part of this story that's interesting. I said before, I'm not a finance freak, so the machinations that led to FTX going from having $60 billion in collateral to $9 billion in collateral, I'm not particularly interested in those details. And so there's not a hell of a lot more to say here. We'll keep seeing updates to this story, I'm sure. But for right now, I think the only part here that's particularly interesting is FTX, the business, can have somehow lost, what is that, $50 billion in value. But Sequoia, one of the venerable venture capital firms which backed this business, only took a $150 million loss. If that's not evidence of the, I don't know, I think sort of misaligned incentives. I know, I get it. This is the nature of the venture industry. It's what it's supposed to go do, is place a series of bets, the majority of which will go to zero. But you can't help smell the, in sort of a moral sense, injustice of however many millions of people lost value that they would have otherwise been able to use to keep food on their tables and roofs over their heads. Meanwhile, the ultra wealthy people who backed the business and helped create its legitimacy in the market, they took a loss that, in relative terms, sort of baked into their cost of doing business. And probably doesn't really affect the perpetuation of their business or the well-being of the people who operate that business. And that kind of sucks. Bloomberg, sources, hundreds of Foxconn workers at the iPhone plant in Zhengzhou clashed with security guards as protests erupted over unpaid wages and COVID-19 fears. Man, this TSMC facility can't come soon enough. The one being built in Arizona, which is more than likely being bankrolled in no small part by Apple. And make no mistake, a TSMC facility to manufacture chips that go into iPhones does not mean that there won't be a Foxconn facility that assembles iPhones, because that's a very different part of the process. Unfortunately, I have to wonder, the worse this story gets, at what point does it tip into creating some degree of visible negative reaction at the thought of replacing your phone every time Apple shows up and says, here's a newer phone, it's shinier and better, don't you want it? Again, the totality of the process by which a state-of-the-art computer is brought into being is so complicated that you need to spend an hour just to kind of preload all the pieces on the board in order to have a reasonable discussion. But the optics are the facility that Apple uses to build the phones that they then turn around every September and encourage you to buy is severely mistreating the human beings who work there. Are those people Apple's employees? No. Are those people employed in part because of how Apple does business and Apple's encouragement that everyone go buy a new phone every year? Yes. How do you square those things as an individual in the market? Everybody's got to make their own decision, but if the story around this facility in China does not get better soon, I would look to the people who sort of orbit Apple as their central locus of content creation, right? There are people whose entire livelihood is wrapped around talking about Apple's advances as a business. When do they start talking about this and start asking questions about the ethical defensibility of supporting Apple's business practices, which in this case are doing business with an entity that treats people not well? AJ Vinson's Cyberscoop, in its Q3 adversarial threat report, Meta attributes a pro-US campaign to US military-run phony Facebook accounts, pages, groups, and Instagram accounts. Related, Jeff Horowitz, Wall Street Journal, Facebook's Q3 widely viewed content report. In a first, none of the top 20 posts broke platform rules. Sources detail Meta's latest fight against spammy content. Man, the notion that one of the entities listed in an adversarial threat report issued by an American company is actors within the American military. Wild. The second piece here, that in the widely viewed content report, none of the top 20 posts, which, let's be clear, in the totality of content that the Facebook Blue app has flowing through it over a 90-day period, the idea that we can slice the top 20 and say anything meaningful about, again, the totality of content moving through that system strikes me as preposterous. I mean, look at all of Spotify's data on music that is streamed over a 90-day period worldwide, and then show me what the top 20 songs are. Are you really saying anything that's meaningful about culture? I don't think so. But the idea that none of those most popular posts violated platform rules, the people that write the platform rules are in the room with the people that publish the reports. And both of those groups are in the room with the people who are looking at all of the content that's moving through the system. I mean, maybe there's some degree of discipline and those entities are sort of firewalled from one another. But if you don't think that at some high level, it's not in Facebook or Meta's interest to tune the policy rules in order to make it appear as though the most popular content in the system conforms to its rules, in order to support the conclusion that the content flowing through the system is sufficiently free of toxicity, you're out of your mind. You're not paying attention. So both of these things, the idea that actors on behalf of the US military are manipulating Meta's tools in order to support the US military, like, welcome to the party. Like, of course, you're gonna support your team, even if that means that you wind up violating the rules of the system within which you're trying to support your team. But the rules themselves, if you don't think that those things are fluid and possibly affected by the overall business interest of the business that operates the system, I mean, one of these things is just a misinformation is an us problem. It's not a problem for them to go solve for us. We have to grow up as people. And that's really hard when you're talking about the scale of population that flows through these systems. Second, the idea that there's any real validity to whenever Facebook stands up and says, most of the content flowing through our systems is perfectly acceptable. It's not toxic. It's not dangerous. It's not unhealthy. I just think if you don't take that with a grain of salt, you're lying to yourself. But wouldn't be the first time any of us lied to ourselves. Serglu Gatlan, bleeping computer. Windows subsystem for Linux is now generally available for Windows 10 and 11 via the Microsoft Store, as Microsoft makes the store version of WSL the default. Cool. Windows should continue to mature into a platform which can be utilized for any and all manner of computer science. I'm not sure there's a whole lot else that's worth mentioning about this particular change. Trying to make the Windows Store the predominant way that software is distributed to Windows systems. I think it's a valiant effort, but traditional operating systems, the users of those systems aren't going to give up the tools that have existed for them for longer than I've been alive, right? The ability to go get a piece of code and deploy it with full root access to your own hardware is part of why traditional computing devices are still valuable. And so moving the WSL distribution to be predominantly something that flows through the Microsoft Store, that's not as telling to me as the fact that there will certainly be alternate ways to get a hold of this software package for, I don't know, place a long bet, as long as Windows exists. So, whatever. Cecilia De Anastasio, Bloomberg. Amazon's Twitch makes changes to address child predation concerns, including mandatory phone verification and improving account termination for users under 13. This is the work that has to be done. We seem to be, as an industry, slowly moving toward the realization that a lot of the most popular uses of computing, generally speaking, are things which young children probably should not be exposed to. I know that's an incredibly broad statement, and there are a variety of counterexamples. The sooner you can sit a child down in front of a computing device and teach them how to program, you're almost certainly teaching a form of modern literacy, which will serve them well for the rest of their lives. But yeah, if you run a platform like Twitch, or you run a platform like Twitter, or you run a platform like Instagram, or you run a platform like GitHub, you have a responsibility to put up some meaningful guardrails so that users who are just old enough to try to gain access to those systems without supervision, but are really not yet old enough to be able to protect their own well-being within those systems. You got to do this work, and it's going to be imperfect. It's going to be messy, but it has to get done. So good on the Twitch team for doing the hard work. New York Times. Since Elon Musk's takeover, sources say Twitter has, in some cases, chosen not to pay vendors as it reviews and renegotiates deals to cut expenses. related Liz Hoffman, Semaphore. Despite Elon Musk publicly distancing himself from SBF, texts between them on May 5th show SBF rolled over $100 million in Twitter stock during Musk's takeover. There are all manner of reasons for people to have negative feelings about Elon taking Twitter private and running the business as he has been for more or less the last month. This is another one of those for the people with that perspective, or I should say both of these, both the notion that he's chosen for Twitter to not pay some of the vendors that the company has been doing business with, and the notion that Elon and SBF were working together in order to help the financing of the buyout to go through. I continue to feel that Elon is behaving in a way which, while it's easy and understandable to dislike, his behavior can be characterized as erratic and unpredictable and unkind and unethical and even immoral. I don't think that the people who make those cases are wrong out of hand. I don't think that they're ill-informed. I just continue to believe that in the grand scheme of Twitter as a business and Elon as someone who runs multiple businesses, it's too soon to tell. I was in a Twitter space this past Friday that had sort of three categories of voice. There were those for whom Twitter represents a material percentage of the toolkit for them to do their jobs. These are many people who are professional journalists. There are people who use Twitter for legitimate forms of social organizing and activism and I can't think of the third word right now, agitation for the improvement of the lived experience in various parts of the world. And there's this third group of people who are convinced of Elon's personality and his personal proclivities and how those things are coming out and how the business is being run. And there's a tremendous amount of overlap across these groups in terms of concluding that Elon is a bad actor. And I didn't have a chance to speak. There were, at the high watermark, 20,000 people listening at the same time. And over the course of the 3-hour space, I think almost 200,000 people tuned in at one point or another. But my perspective continues to be, you could be right about everything that's being said about Elon as an individual, about his reasons for buying the business, about his goals for the business into the future. But it's barely been 30 days. And I haven't checked since I started my workout here in the garage, but it's still working. Is it working in exactly the same ways? No. You know why? Because he's cut the operation of the business to as deep as he possibly can and still maintain its baseline functionality. Will he be proven right? Or will the service fall over at some point? The World Cup is happening, catch the fever, who knows? But the point is, all of those various groups of people, with the exception of I would say some percentage of the group who wanted to really spend all of their energy on Elon as an individual, as opposed to I use Twitter to do my job, or I use Twitter to improve the lives of myself and others, they all share a common point of view, which is Twitter's really valuable. Like, you could have cherry picked throughout this 3 hour conversation one of the greatest pieces of Twitter advertising and marketing campaign I think anyone has ever seen. Like, the number of people who talk about how unique it is and how indispensable it is are legion. And so the notion that he took money from someone who also appears to be lacking in scruples or ethical fiber, or the notion that he is putting the legal contracts with Twitter's vendor businesses to the test and seeing what happens if you don't pay. Quite frankly, again, try and factor out your feelings about this person as an individual and just say, if you bought this business because you believe it is materially important to the species, and you're trying to fundamentally change it so that it can continue to be fundamental to the species, what would you do? And more to the point, what would you be unwilling to do? Would you be unwilling to cut more than half the headcount in the least humane way you possibly could? I don't know. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. I don't think I would. I don't think I'd have the stomach to be as sort of callous as he was. But then again, I don't know. It continues to feel like a big wait and see thing, and the quickness with which all of us want to rush to some unified theory of Twitter's doom in Elon's hands, it just fundamentally feels counter to what many of the same people are saying with their next breath, which is, this thing is so valuable to us, we don't want to see it go away. Taylor Lorenz, Washington Post. An interview with Drill on Elon Musk's Twitter, which he says is a work in progress, like Hyperloop, and will be a beautiful thing at the end of the day. Here you go. If you're not familiar with Drill, take a minute, go look up Drill on Twitter. May not be your cup of tea, but I think it's inspired for Taylor to have got this interview, because there are many people who are high profile users of Twitter. Kim Kardashian, Donald Trump, I don't know, Lionel Messi, is he on Twitter? I don't know. But that category of people, they're not of Twitter culture in the same way that someone like Drill is. Drill, I mean, I don't know if I had any say in the matter. When you went to the Oxford English Dictionary and you looked up shit poster, you'd see a reference to Drill. Like, it is the canonical example of just say crass shit because it's the internet and you can do that. I'm not advocating for the world needing a place for people like Drill to say crass shit, although I wouldn't necessarily advocate against it either. What I'm saying is, if you want some kind of a canary for what Twitter's value has been and what it could be into the future, I don't know that you're going to get as much useful signal by going and interviewing Kim Kardashian as you would by interviewing Drill. This is a person who is of the culture of this platform. And that is useful for at least two reasons. One, it's useful to understand what has made the platform sticky and what has made it valuable. And it's useful as an example of, is this what we want the platform to continue to be, or does it need to grow and change in ways that no one can succinctly describe today? So I'll end by saying this is the first interview with someone who uses Twitter on the future of the platform and the business, because let's remember those two things are distinct. They're really not today, but they ought to trend toward being more distinct. I wrote on Twitter earlier this week, the future of Twitter.com needs to look a lot like WordPress.com. If you get that reference, I think you'll understand. If you don't, let me know. This is the first interview that I'm motivated to read. New York Times. New York becomes the first U.S. state to restrict crypto mining as Governor Kathy Hochul signs a bill imposing a 2-year moratorium on permits at fossil fuel plants. Great. I continue to be long crypto, long blockchains, in spite of all of the FTX malarkey, in spite of all of the grifting. I think that the fundamental technology has value, and over time we will determine the best applications for it. And mining uses electricity. Getting that electricity from the byproducts of fossil fuel energy production, I think, is a legitimately interesting area of exploration. And so, while on the face of it, I would say this is the wrong move on the part of the state of New York, I think it's a good thing, because for a state as sort of high profile and powerful as New York to say, we're not allowing anyone to explore this relationship between mining for cryptocurrency and fossil fuel production. To put a 2-year moratorium on that creates opportunity for other markets that wasn't there before or might not have been there before. So I think this is a great thing. Hopefully, by the end of the 2-year moratorium, we'll know a lot more. And if I had to plant chips on the table, I would say I believe that 2 years from now, it will be more clear that using the byproducts of fossil fuel production to facilitate this fundamental technology will be a good idea. But we'll see in 2 years. Bloomberg. Sources. Genesis Global has $2.8 billion in outstanding loans, including around 30% of its lending made to related parties like its parent company, DCG. I don't know what Genesis Global is or what it does. So on to the next one. Patricia Nilsson, Financial Times. Omdia. In 2022, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Apple are on pace to take 68% of the $500 billion online ad revenue market made by non-China companies driven by video campaigns. Could take this in either direction. You could say that the consolidation and the majority of the value being extracted from facilitating online advertising being in the hands of a very small number of businesses is fundamentally less healthy of a market signal than if we had 2 or 10x the number of businesses that were providing the tools and affordances for people to advertise online. That said, are there 5 businesses that are there other businesses that are better able to facilitate online advertising than these 4? I don't think so. So, I mean, something tells me it has never been easier to spin up a piece of online advertising and know that it is possible to have that piece of advertising reach effectively everyone who's online. The issue, of course, is how much does it cost in order to get that messaging in front of enough people that it is therefore in front of the right people. I don't know. I'm not an advertising person. I have at least one acquaintance who is, so maybe I'll ask them. Stuart A. Thompson, New York Times, analysis of the 140,000 accounts paying for Twitter Blue. Many are far-right influencers. The average has 560 followers. Some are spoofs and more. I don't think it should come as a shock to anyone that the cohort of people in America who have been loudly beating the drum of our voice is being suppressed are disproportionately those who will spend the money in order for their point of view to be more likely to be disseminated to the largest set of people. The notion that some of them are spoofs, of course they are. If you don't think that there was bad faith behavior in traditional messaging before you could spend $8 to be a verified account on Twitter, I think you should go back and consult some history. The most relevant thing here is the estimation that there are 140,000 accounts that are being billed $8 a month. That's really the only thing that's meaningful here. I don't know how many there were before $8 a month got you verification. Many people have made the comparison that the total number of verified users on Twitter before you could buy verification was somehow indicative of the total addressable market for this product, which doesn't make any sense. The question here is, if we're at 140,000 now, where are we in 90 days? Where are we in 6 months? Where are we in a year? Yes, there's a caveat, which is Twitter has to keep running for all of those periods of time. I tend to think that it will. And so whether there are only 140,000 verified accounts in a year or in 6 months remains to be seen. But if I had to place a bet, I would say that number's going up. Denny Jacob, Wall Street Journal, HP plans to lay off 4 to 5,000 employees, or up to around 10% of its workforce over the next 3 years, aiming to achieve 1.4 billion in annualized cost savings. Related, Brody Ford, Bloomberg, HP reports Q4 revenue down 11.2% year over year to 14.8 billion, and personal systems revenue down 13% year over year to 10.3 billion, and forecasts a 10% drop in PC sales in FY23. This would appear to be the best example thus far of how to do layoffs in a sort of the most humane way, which is to say, to progressively remove people. It's counter to the wisdom which I hear most commonly attributed to Bill Gurley, which is certainly the playbook that Elon appears to be running, which is cut as deep as you can, as fast as you can, because you're going to get all of the negative sentiment from taking jobs away from people. You have to get through that period of negative sentiment as quick as possible, both so that you can change the trajectory of the business for the better and so that you can change the sentiment around the business for the better. But HP is doing something that isn't that, but maybe will ultimately be shown to be meaningful and a better way to do it. I don't know. The notion that their Q4 reporting indicates that there's just a continued downward trend in people buying PCs, devices that run traditional operating systems. The writing's on the wall. These devices, as a category, are in maintenance mode. They have specialized use cases where they will continue to be valuable for a period of time. But the notion that the right device for the average individual who's going to be online in a personal or professional capacity needs to continue to be something that runs a traditional operating system where the user has the ability to reach all the way into the file system. I just don't believe that that's the future. I think that we're going to continue to see evidence that those devices are not where money is going to get spent, both because devices that run modern operating systems have superior utility in a variety of ways, but also because those that run traditional platforms that are already in market, they do everything anybody needs them to do. Again, outside of highly specialized verticals. So, yeah.